Hello. Hi there, everybody. We'll just give people a couple of minutes to join and then we'll get started.
Up to now, I know most of them.
That's good. We've already had some people wishing us a good day. Hello. That's nice. We're glad that you were able to join us. I'm going to do it sounds like I'm going to do an introduction to people who already know all about you. Be nice. All right, we'll give one more minute perhaps, and then we can begin. Oh, someone else has joined. Hello, welcome. Okay, so hello everybody and welcome to this advocacy webinar. We're so pleased that you were able to join us today, and we're extremely grateful to Matej Kosir, who will be presenting to you all today. Matej is currently the director of the Institute of Research and Development, Utrip. He has 13 years of experience in the government as policy advisor in addiction prevention, youth risk behavior, alcohol policy, as well as 14 years of experience in private research, institute, prevention, youth risk behavior, alcohol policy, illicit drug policy, advocacy, and evaluation. He is also an author, co-author, and reviewer of journal and scientific articles and papers, as well as a lecturer at conferences, trainings, and workshops. So we're very excited to have him here today to deliver this webinar. And if you have any questions throughout the webinar or ones that you would like answered at the end, please put them in the chat box or in the Q&A feature, and we will spend some time at the end and Matej can answer them for you. Okay, so I will hand over to Matej now. I'm just going to turn off my camera and go on mute and be here if you need me. Okay.
Okay. Hello, thanks for joining us in another webinar on advocacy. It's the second one already in a row. organized by International Consortium of Universities for Drug Demand Reduction. And I'm happy to repeat the webinar. I'm sure that there will be something new discussions as well. So it will be exciting and interesting for me as a presenter as well. So let's start. Okay. Our institute mostly deal with evidence-based policies and practices in the field of prevention. We started as a prevention professionals in 2006 as an institute, and but you know, advocacy was not really what we thought at that time we would do in our professional career, because we thought that if you bring all the evidence from prevention science on the table to decision and policymakers, they say, okay, great, we will do it. But soon we saw that it doesn't work like this. So it's we need much more efforts to convince policy and decision makers to change some policies or to adopt some policies or to give some funding, investment in prevention. So this is a long process. So since 2006, we got a lot of experience in different areas of work, in tobacco policy, in alcohol policy. We were more successful in tobacco policy and less successful in alcohol policy, for example, and also quite successful regarding prevention standards at the European level. So we have really extensive experience in how to do advocacy. So all our workshops and trainings, and also this webinar, is purely based on our own experience. Of course, there is also a science behind. We know a lot of, we read a lot of articles, we met a lot of scientists who study advocacy as well. So we try to bring also scientific knowledge on advocacy to our courses and training and education in this field. So, but most of what we say it's not just based on science, but in addition is based on our experience. So this is a short introduction of this webinar. After saying something about definitions, aims and objectives, we will try to cover the most important sessions of advocacy. And the first one is definitely how to influence policy and decision-making processes in practice. So this is really one of the most important parts of advocacy work, and it is not present in many education and trainings in this field. It's more in other trainings and education on advocacy, it's more like discussion on coalition building, which is also important part of our webinar, and also a lot about media advocacy. I think the most most covered area in advocacy is this how to work with media, how to make the case with media advocacy. So this is also very important part in our webinar. And also at the end, we will discuss a little bit how to develop effective advocacy plan, what is important to include in advocacy plan before we jump into any activities. We have to be prepared because, you know, on the other side, we have really experts in lobbying, in advocacy as well, like unhealthy industries. They're really capable and they have a lot of money, a lot of knowledge how to persuade policy and decision makers to adopt some policies which are in favor to businesses. So we also have to be really ready, prepared, well prepared in advance before we do anything in advocacy field. And at the end, I hope there will be a lot of time and nice discussions. So we can close our webinar in fruitful discussion with you. advocacy skills, especially in the last few years, we have noticed that they are becoming more and more essential for public health scientists, researchers, and practitioners. And usually when we speak about advocacy, everybody thinks about, this is a civil society issue. So civil society is doing advocacy. But we already overcome this discussion. So it is very clear that advocacy skills are essential, not just for practitioners, for civil society, but also for public health scientists and researchers, universities, academics, etc. To potentially influence policies, decision-making processes for better health-related policy and practice. Relevant research funding, for example, addiction science programs, at the university level. So it doesn't matter if it is prevention or treatment or any other recovery, any other fields in the field of prevention. So those skills are becoming really essential for our future work. Especially those skills are important in those areas where unhealthy industries are influential or they want to be important stakeholders in the field, such as alcohol, tobacco, cannabis industry in the last couple of years. And also in some cases, pharmaceutical industry also want to be influential. We know that from many cases, not just in media, also in our professional experience can tell us there are many such kind of examples in practice. So that's why we think that advocacy training is extremely important, because if we are not trained, we do mistakes. We did a lot of mistakes in our when we started with our advocacy activities, and we learned a lot from our mistakes. So we can now share our knowledge and skills and experience with other people, so you don't make the same mistakes like we did in the past. And those kind of trainings, potentially, if the training is long enough, detailed enough, we can really increase competence on forging stronger relationship with policy and decision makers to make ourselves relevant to them, and also to other key stakeholders in the field of addictions, like university leaders, for example. It is also important that we use research to inform policy and decision makers, because if we don't use research and evidence we have, we can easily be trapped into some really not relevant and not evidence-based discussions with, especially with unhealthy industries, which they have their own interests in these discussions. So research is mostly on our side. Let's say that 99% of evidence in science is on our side. So we have to use this 99% against maybe 1%, which is on the side of unhealthy industries. So using research to inform policy decision makers extremely important to have. Also, we can increase competence on providing expert testimony to speak, for example, in the parliament, to speak in media, etc. So we need some skills to do this. Also, to write position papers, press releases, to organize press conferences, increase visibility and recognition of evidence-based public health or addiction policies and practices. And not the least important, extremely important, to commit ourselves to ongoing advocacy. For us, for example, it is 24 hours a day work. We have to be aware of what the opposite side, the industry, is doing. They're present 24 hours a day, all the time, in media, in the parliament, at the ministries. So we have to be aware what they are doing and respond as soon as possible to their activities. So this must be ongoing activity in our professional life if we want to achieve really good result with our advocacy activities. What is advocacy? There are a lot of misunderstandings, including in the literature. A lot of people mix advocacy with lobbying. Some people mix advocacy with social marketing as well. But advocacy is, let's say, umbrella of an area of working in this field. So lobbying could be part of advocacy. Social marketing could be part of advocacy as well. So when we speak about advocacy, this is, I would say, more educating policy and decision makers to make better decisions about policies and practice. And lobbying is more like a, I would say, pushing for a particular vote already. This is the final stage when they vote for particular policy and funding. So this is more like a last phase of advocacy. And social marketing, for example, we can use a lot of social marketing techniques, especially if public opinion is not on our side and we have to change public opinion and get support of people at the first place before we go to policy and decision makers to discuss with them. So we can use, as advocates, also lobbying and social marketing in our activities. And advocacy is usually done also individually and most of the time as a group. Individually, forget about any kind of success as an individual. We are not like a Bono from U2 or some big influencers, global influencers, who can directly influence policy and decision makers. So we are too small stakeholders, too small participants in this process. So it's more likely to gain some success to join as an advocacy group with other scientists, researchers, practitioners, etc. We will discuss about this a little bit later. And our intention is not just influencing policy and decision makers, but also resource allocation decisions. So funding is extremely important part of advocacy activities. So if there is only a legislation without any financial background, any funding for example, research or doing some work with target groups, it's less likely that policy will be implemented well. So also resource allocation decisions are extremely important in advocacy. Also, it's not just about policies and practices, like developing, establishing, and changing policies and practices, but also establishing and sustaining evidence-based interventions and services for a long-term period. And it's not like, you know, once we win in advocacy and get some support from the policy and decision makers, we have to be aware that those decisions can change in the future. So we have to be aware all the time about those processes of changing policies and practices to sustain our services, to sustain our evidence-based interventions, and also research activities in this field. And funding, of course, to sustain the funding and continue our quality work in the future. What we include in advocacy, it could be media campaign, could be public speaking, publishing research or polls, filing some briefs to the parliament, writing some additional arguments, amendments to legislation, complaints, lobbying, social marketing. Those activities could all be included in advocacy. Also, speaking about addiction science advocacy, it exists. I checked the literature, so also addiction science advocacy exists already. There are discussions focused on addiction science advocacy, and it is defined as a way to conceptualize what is needed in the addiction field to translate scientific findings into public policy and education programs at the end. What we want to do in international consortium of universities and other associations and societies as well in the field of drug-demand reduction. And by changing or improving policies and education programs, we can therefore reduce the harmful consequences of substance use problems. So that's our goal in advocacy activities. Speaking about policy cycle and the ways how and where we can influence, when we can influence policy and decision makers, we are too much focusing on only two phases of policy cycle. In adoption phase, if we are lucky, we are invited by policy and decision makers to discuss adoption of some legislation or funding schemes or strategies, etc. And usually when everything is already adopted, then we jump and criticize what has been adopted by politicians in this implementation phase, where it's pretty much too late to get any changes adopted. Maybe, you know, in legislation there are several years processes. For example, in tobacco in Slovenia, it's 10 years period. Every 10 years we change legislation in the field of tobacco. It's already in the last 30 years we change tobacco legislation every 10 years. So you can imagine if we jump into advocacy activities too late, where everything is already adopted, then it's pretty much too late to do anything in a short period of time. So it is extremely important that we start doing our advocacy activities at the beginning of policy cycle, which is agenda setting. Just for example, to influence political parties before elections to put some content from our professional field into the pre-election programs. If we get into pre-election programs, they promise this to the voters. If they establish the government with other political parties, it's more likely that this policy will actually be adopted and implemented at the end. It is not 100% sure, of course, because there are many obstacles and barriers already, you know, in every policy and decision-making process, but it's more likely that something will be adopted at the end and implemented in practice as well. So we have to use our capacity and our knowledge and experience to jump into this policy cycle as advocates as soon as possible already in agenda setting and or policy formulation phases. And also be aware that policies are evaluated so we can see from the experience what has to be changed and improved in the future. So this is a part of ongoing advocacy work. And we have to include pretty much all relevant stakeholders in all phases of policy cycle. Speaking about coalition, if we want to be successful, we need really strong, effective coalition. And there are several steps and rules we have to take into consideration when we try to establish effective coalitions. Coalitions or alliance, with coalition, we mean more ad hoc coalitions. So short-term period, maybe one focus, one policy focus, but alliances are more structured, are already established body, like non-communicable disease alliances, like we have Slovenian NCD alliance and established as an association. So we plan our work, strategic work in the field of advocacy in different fields. So this is more like an ongoing advocacy. Coalitions are usually ad hoc, one focus, one policy, and after the legislation is adopted or not, then those coalitions usually stop doing things and they focus on some other issues in the future. But alliances are more strategic advocacy work, more focused on strategic advocacy work. And usually there are a group of people could be countries or other stakeholders that join together for common purpose. Common purpose is the key in every coalition and alliance. If we don't have common purpose, it's useless to build coalition with the partners which don't share the same common purpose with us. When we build coalition and alliance, we have to set up some rules of behaving and working cooperatively. This is extremely important to avoid any kind of problems, because sometimes it's hard if we don't agree on who will be responsible for what, who will cover, for example, media, who will go to media. Then some people can just go to media without informing others, and then we have a serious problem in coalition. So everything has to be agreed among partnership in the coalitions and alliances, so we know immediately who do what and who is responsible for which part of advocacy plan. Important stakeholders in coalitions, this is also very important to discuss. For example, if we check for example, advocating for university program, who are the most important stakeholders? Researchers and professionals are, in this case, the most important stakeholders and advocacy coalition members, like universities, institutes, etc. But not just them. Also, NGOs, civil society working in this field can help to bring the needs of the target population to these discussions. So we don't only advocating for university program, but we bring also evidence and needs from the ground. So what kind of professionals, knowledge and skills we need in civil society organizations or other services, so we can advocate really for a particular university program which can deliver and can have impact on increased knowledge and skills needed in the ground. So those two groups of stakeholders are the most important, for example, if we advocate for university program. But of course, we can always include media, if we have journalists in the family or in the group, it's always nice because they can help us to connect with his or her colleagues in other media. They know how media works, so they can advise us how to prepare a media advocacy plan, etc., etc. How to develop media messages, also write a press release, organize media conference. They are professionals in the field, and they can really help us a lot if we have opportunity to involve them. And also, in some cases, we can involve also policy and decision makers, like members of the parliament, some ministries, local communities, etc. Just for example, if we advocate for addiction science program at the university, and the Ministry of Education is responsible for putting that into practice, we can invite Ministry of Health to help us with arguments with advocating at the governmental level for our university program. So sometimes we can use policy and decision makers themselves as a part of our coalitions. Industry, it's very tricky to involve industry, but in some cases, for example, we sometimes use one part of the industry against another part of the industry. This is not so much relevant for advocacy science, advocacy, but mostly for policy, public health policy advocacy. For example, if we speak about alcohol labeling, for example, beer industry is more in favor to put labels on the bottles because the nutritional information is not so much against them. So There's not so much sugar in beer, it's more sugar in wine and in spirits. So spirits and wine industry is not so in favor to put alcohol labels on the bottles. So we can sometimes discuss with beer industry to support alcohol labeling, and we can make progress in this field. Especially at the European level, we use this kind of methods more than at the national level. So it is possible, but we have to be really careful. We don't invite them as members of coalitions, but we can involve them in our discussions and contact them if we need them to make some policy decision happen in practice. To build successful coalitions, we have to follow a series of steps. For example, we mentioned already common compatible goals. We have to have mutual benefits of co-working. So it's not like, 90% of people work, but 10% of people get benefits. So this is not really good ratio of benefits of co-working. So we have to be really careful while we deliver the responsibilities and activities to other members of the coalition. And of course, we have to take care of costs as well. So if there is too much cost for some advocacy activities, motivation to do advocacy will drop significantly very shortly. So we have to be careful about the costs as well. So the benefits are surpassing the costs. Of course, there are benefits and also disadvantages of coalitions. Benefits are mostly related to success. We have bigger potential of success if we build effective coalition. We empower the weaker members, which is good for the future. So if we empower weaker members, maybe those members will lead our advocacy activities in the future more often. So it will not be only on our burden, but we can share with other members the leadership in advocacy activities. So it is important to empower also other members in the coalition. Of course, we concentrate expertise and resources if we build good coalition, which is especially important when we do some media advocacy activities. But of course, like in every coalition, every marriage or collaboration, there are also disadvantages. For example, overworking is one of them, different levels of resources and interests within the group, different levels of credit. So some people might be jealous on others who are more present in the media, on the television, in radio. So that kind of things can really disturb some good collaboration within coalitions. And also in the case of addiction science advocacy, there could also produce some competition between universities and faculties, which is sometimes not a good way to do things in advocacy. As I said, it's like in a marriage. So we have to be careful what kind of partner we choose, what kind of interests and goals we share with them or not. And then on the basis of this knowledge and assessment, we decide who will be our partner in the coalitions. So this is one of the most important steps of building good, effective coalitions, long-term coalitions. About media, and this will be the final part of this webinar. I have to check the time. Yes, it's perfect timing. You can read this on my slide, very famous quote by American journalist: "If you don't exist in media, you don't exist at all." And this is more and more important in today's world, especially in the times of epidemic crisis. Media is still very active. People listen, watch the media. So we have to be in media to get attention from policy and decision makers and get also the results from our advocacy activities. Social media, if we know that unhealthy industries put billions of dollars and euros to be present in social media, we have to do the same. Not billions, we don't have billions of euros, but if we get some good knowledge, good ideas how to manage our social media accounts and profiles, then we can be much more present in social media and get attention in this way. For example, in Slovenia, Twitter is the best channel to get policy and decision makers' attention, because they are pretty much all on Twitter. And if you are able to put, if you know how to deal with hashtags, tags, and those kind of tools in social media, you can get really good attention and a lot of likes, a lot of tweets, retweets, shares, etc. So this is what we want to do to spread our message and to gain a good media coverage, good media attention. Which is important because policy and decision makers follow media. So if we get media attention, we get also policy and decision makers attention. This is a logic in this case. So good message, sometimes it's really necessary to spend some time, maybe a few hours, few days, to develop really good message. Message is crucial. If we develop bad message, even with excellent press conference, excellent distribution of tasks and discussions with policy decision makers, we cannot get good attention by media and of course by policy decision makers. So investing in good message is sometimes crucial. So spend more time to develop good message, and then everything will be much easier in the next phases and next steps of advocacy planning. Media plan is the same as in the case of advocacy plan. Before we go to media, before we contact our first journalist on a way of getting attention, we need good media plan. After a year, after a few years of experience in advocacy, I can say that this is more now like a routine. But at the beginning, when we start with advocacy, it's really important that we develop really good media plan to develop proper message based on the needs and research we have. And we have to answer those 4 key questions. PowerPoint presentation will be available to you, to everybody who wants to get PowerPoint presentation. No problem, just email me and I will send it to you or to colleagues from International Consortium of universities. So you can read in details what kind of questions are the most important. But we have to answer pretty much all of them. Especially, we have to offer solution. Because if we don't offer solution and journalists will come and ask us about the solutions, we have to be ready to answer what are possible solutions at the end. Otherwise, they will say, oh, they are not serious. They just criticize things and they have nothing to say and to offer as a solution. So this is really important part of this, process. Lists and contact information on media, like journals, scientific journals, because it's not really good idea to send to everybody the whole list of 100 emails visible to everybody. So we have to use this secret copy. This is one of the important guidelines, but we have to prepare in advance which journals, which journalists, which media editors we want to approach with our messages and with our media communication. Because it's not really good idea to send to everybody on the list. We have really divided selected list of journalists covering, for example, health issues, social issues, crime prevention issues, more, alcohol, tobacco policy issues. There are journalists and media who are specialized for some topics, and we have to take this into consideration. Prepare a good message, distribute tasks and roles within a group, select a good speaker and reporter, because not everybody is capable to speak in media, on the television. We can train other people in the future, but at that moment we have to select the best speaker we have in our group, and also prepare additional material, sources, information if journalists and media come to ask us additional questions. So this is always good to have prepared in advance. There are several methods of using media. On our trainings, we train people how to use, how to write press releases, which are more likely to be copy-pasted sometimes by media or used in their articles and presentations. It's also important to know how to write blogs, because you can follow the same story over the certain period of time. With blogs, you can add another blog and another comment. You can collect comments from colleagues and from policy and decision makers. So blogs are a good way to discuss particular issue in a longer period of time, to keep focus on one or several key issues in your advocacy plan. So this is a good tool to use. Also, interviews on television, radio discussions, speeches is involved here. So there are several characteristics, several guidelines how we can be more effective in media, on television, how to dress, how to prepare ourselves. Is it more, pro and contra discussions? So we have to prepare ourselves to write some counter arguments against opposition, against industry, for example. So it matters the format of TV show or radio show, and how we dress, the background in the studio, the color of the background. You have to be aware what is the color, so you dress properly for the TV show, for example, or interview on the television. And also for the interview, for example, because they usually take photos of you, and you have not to be in Bermuda shorts or t-shirt, but you have to be well dressed also for the photo shooting for the interview. Press conference is extremely important. There are several suggestions, proposals, how to do quality press conference. We participated in many very boring press conferences, so we learned a lot from those bad conferences. So we think that we are able now, with all this experience, to organize really quality and well-attended conference by media. So we can share this knowledge as well with other people. I mentioned social media is becoming more and more important, especially we want to address policy and decision makers, and there are plenty of them. And again, guidelines, good guidelines, how to do this in social media. And this is important part of our trainings and education in the field of advocacy as well. So this is the main components of advocacy plan preparation process. I will also, you will be able to read these phases and also questions on my slides. So we will not go into details, because this is another webinar. It could be another webinar about how to prepare a quality advocacy plan. But all those phases and questions are extremely important to discuss and to develop as a coalition. And then when we have a good advocacy plan ready, then we start with our advocacy. And usually it's very fun, it's very nice, funny job, a lot of laughing, a lot of good experience, communication, especially within coalitions. but it's a bit less funny when it comes to really I don't know how to say, the politicians who try to defend industries' interests and background. It could be also very tough to be advocate, but most of the time in the process of developing advocacy plan, in communication within coalitions, it is really nice and valuable job you can do in the future. So now it's time for questions and discussions. And this is our contact information, so you can come back to us by email and ask additional questions also after this webinar. Thank you very much.
Hello, that was really fascinating. I really enjoyed that. We currently don't have any questions in the chat, but someone had raised their hand. So if you do have any questions or things you would like to be clarified or explained in further detail, please do write them in the chat now. At the bottom, I think, of your screen, you should be able to find the chat feature or the question and answer. Either one is fine. If you have anything that you would like to ask. I will give people a second to type, see if anything comes through.
No questions.
Obviously, you covered all of the things they wanted to know.
No, but it's much more. You know, the trainings we conduct, and we have developed some of them. The longest is 4 days training.
Oh, wow.
With all the details and simulation of some media advocacy activities. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of people are not aware that, you know, if you are on the moving chair and if you are moving during the interview, it looks not really nice on the television. Mm. For example, or if you are dressed in a ugly yellow t-shirt and you go to the studio, which is, you know, the background is in a blue or a blue color, it doesn't look nice. So
you have to think of
everything. We learned a lot from our own experience. So we did a lot of mistakes in the past, so we know exactly what we are talking about.
Perhaps if no questions are coming through, do you have any particular moments or stories that from your experience that you might want to share, that people that you learned from, perhaps as an experience that people might like to hear?
Yeah, for example, this addiction science advocacy is rather new for us, because before we were not so much focused on developing education and training programs. But now we are in the process at the university level here in Slovenia to advocate for university study program in the field of prevention. Mm. So we are now learning as well from our previous experience, more in policy field. We learned a lot and we are using this knowledge and experience also how to advocate for university prevention study. Mm. So we are using this, but and it's pretty much the same logic. So it's not so much different. We have to deal with pretty much the same steps, and media as well. We have to involve media. Instead of maybe politicians, we mostly focus on university leaders. Mm-hmm. Ministry of Education is the key policy stakeholder. So it depends on the topic, on the challenge, but it's the logic is pretty much the same. Mm-hmm.
I understand. We have had a question come through. How do we deal with media opposition during advocacy programs?
Oh, so if media are against us, I understand this question. So sometimes, yeah, but you know, media, sometimes we have problems with responsiveness. They are not so responsive as we wish or we want. So it is especially important how we develop the quality message. So with some provocative titles, using some provocative language, of course, with all scientific evidence and arguments behind, uh, we can get media attention much easier. Uh, but still, just for example, from Slovenia, there was a period where when our biggest newspaper was owned by alcohol industry, by beer company. At that time, there was pretty much impossible to get their attention regarding alcohol policy issues. But if you know that, we knew that at that time, we were not so much focusing on them. So we tried to get other media, other newspapers, other journalists aware of our topics. So there are other newspapers, television, radios, and we focus on them, not so much on that particular newspaper. So if you know the situation, it's then much easier to be, you know, flexible and not bothering too much with one particular media, but find another channels, another way how to get media attention, because there are a lot of media, a lot of journals, even our own media. We have our own web platforms, our own social media accounts, so we can do a lot of things by ourselves without even inviting or getting bothered so much with traditional media.
Interesting, thank you.
So I hope this is the answer to this question.
Great. Now's your final opportunity. Oh, she said yes, so we have great, thank you. If there is any other questions you have, now is your opportunity. Feel free to write them in the chat, and you have this perfect opportunity to ask anything that you would like from Matej, so feel free to utilize it.
I have all day just for you.
All day. Well, there you go. Ask anything you'd like. See. So if people would like to learn more about this this subject and this topic, how would you suggest just to reach out to you, or is there anything else that you suggest that they could do?
Yeah, they can send me an email, ask questions. If they are interested, we can also conduct trainings. In this period of epidemic crisis, we can do also online trainings. That's not a problem anymore. We are used to it. In the last few months, we get a lot of experience. We got a lot of experience to do this. So we can arrange online webinars, trainings, and also in person when this crisis is over. So
great, good. Looks like we have another question. Thank you so much. This is about the what about the unwillingness of politicians?
Yeah, I think this is much bigger problem or a challenge than in the case of media opposition, because there are many media. You can always find the media who will cover your topic, especially if you build contacts, relationships, good relationship with journalists. So that's not so big problem. But unwillingness of politicians, this is what is all about in advocacy. Because if all politicians would be willing to listen to you, there won't be any advocacy. You would just come to the ministry or to the parliament, present the issue, the problem, and in a few days or months they will adopt the legislation which would solve this problem. But as I said at the beginning, it doesn't work like this, especially because there is a strong, financially strong, and also with experience, a strong unhealthy industry behind. If we are dealing with the topics like alcohol policy or tobacco policy, they are in the same policy cycle all over and over again. They go to the ministries, they go to the parliamentarians. There is also corruption, of course, we know that. Because politicians do that, they don't do that for nothing, they do that for some benefits they have with future jobs or some money for political parties, etc. So it is all a lot of corruption behind, but even though there is difficult, we are sometimes surprised how strong we can be with our arguments, with our activities. Like last year, there was intention by a large group of parliamentarians, together with tobacco industry, to postpone plain packaging in Slovenia. Plain packaging measure was adopted a few years ago as a part of tobacco legislation. And there was a period, transitional period, and 1st of January this year, it should start it, and it started already. But at that time last year, in the summer time, it was not yet implemented fully in practice. So they wanted to postpone for 3 years, and we know what it means. So first 3 years, and then another 3 years, and then nothing about plain packaging. So after 6 or 7 or 8 years. So that's how they do. The tobacco industry tried to postpone all those measures to I don't know, for I don't know, 5 or 10 years. So it doesn't matter. They always want to postpone or to delete those, to reduce those measures. So they wanted to change this and postpone it for 3 years. And we thought at that time that this is a deal done already between politicians and tobacco industry, because almost half of the parliament signed this proposal. But we were managed to overturn this situation. So a lot of parliamentarians, after we started to do advocacy activities and started to embarrass them in the media and in the parliament in front of the whole colleagues and professionals, some of them changed their mind and resigned from the signature of this proposal. So at the end, this proposal was not adopted by the parliament. So we have now plain packaging since 1st of January, fully implemented in Slovenia. So sometimes we are surprised, although they are unwilling to change, or they are willing to make unhealthy political decisions. We are surprised about the final result at the end. So we have to be patient, resistant, not so emotional, because there are a lot of bad words from politicians, from the industry. They attack us, they threaten us with suing us at the court, etc. There are a lot of unpleasant communication from the opposition. So we have to be really resistant and with our main focus, what we want to achieve as advocates.
Thank you.
Very long answer.
No, it was very interesting. Very interesting. Thank you. Well, I think we're coming up to the end now. So if there are any other last minute questions, please put them in now. If not, then we will conclude this event. I think seems that no other questions at the moment. So thank you so much, Matej, for taking the time to present this webinar today. And thank you all to the ICUDDR members for joining us today. And yes, we look forward to hopefully welcoming you back for more events. So yeah, thank you so much. And we will see you again soon. Goodbye.
Thank you very much. And this webinar will be recorded, so it will be possible also to see it later.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay, good.
Okay, all right.
Thank you.
Thank you.